Okay, so very warm welcome to this week's guest on the MeasurePod, who is Verónica Delgado-Benito. So Veronica, firstly, welcome to the MeasurePod. Thanks for agreeing to come on and talk to Matthew and I.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here today with you. I'm a podcast fan, so yeah.
Oh, wow. No, so we're under pressure in that case. Rather than me doing a really bad job of introducing you, I'll hand it over to you and you can do a much better job of introducing yourself. Just tell our listeners a bit about you. You can go into as much or as little detail as you want, but just a little bit of background and, so what you do now, but also it's always interesting to hear about people's journeys to, how they got to where they are today.
Yeah, definitely. So I work now as a product data analyst for Springer Nature, which is a scientific publisher. And before that, I've been here for almost 2 years already. And before that, I spent another 2 years in a venture capital in Project A here in Berlin. I'm based in Berlin, so I was there for almost 2 years, and also for the podcast fans. And my previous boss was also in the MeasurePod. So it's Ole Borsdorf. He did an episode with you recently, and yeah, he's a great person, great professional, key person in my career, and I was working with him for 2 years. And before that, I did a bootcamp in data science because I decided to change career. So my background is academic. I did a PhD in molecular biology. That's how I ended up in Berlin. So I was basically in a lab doing experiments, fully academic in a research institute. And then from there, I did the transition into the data world.
So, okay, so you have to expand on that a little bit. You just said you just went from there into the data world. So, I mean, there's going to be a bit of detail there, how because very, very different line of work, very different, entirely different, I would imagine. So, how did that change come about?
I think different reasons. So, one of them, I wasn't really sure after the PhD what I wanted to do. But I knew that whatever I was gonna do had to be, I needed to learn more about data because in the lab and in research, I was getting to a point where all my projects were dependent on a bioinformatician at the end of the day. So, and I wanted to control a bit more what I was doing. So I said, okay, whatever I do next, I need some background. And then it happens that in Germany, there's a great thing that when you finish working or you are under unemployment, you get an educational voucher, kind of unlimited of money. So I said, okay, after I finish my PhD, I need to use this because it's a great opportunity, and they financed my bootcamp. So I said, okay, let's do that. And then I got completely hooked into data and what are the possibilities that were in front of me. So yeah, that's how the transition basically happened.
Wow, amazing. That's a great scheme they have in Berlin. What a great thing to be able to actually retrain yourself after finishing in a position.
Yeah, I might move there.
Yeah, I think we might all move there. It's also a great city. So then was it from there into finance, or did I miss a step?
From there, I went to the VC, yes, but within the VC, I worked in data in the data team. So I was not working in finance, more in data analytics. Yeah.
Yeah. So have you got any regrets about leaving academia? I guess I probably know the answer to this, but it's worth.
No, no. I mean, I miss a lot the intellectual stimuli. I think that's difficult to get somewhere else in the same amount. And yeah, I also liked a lot being in the lab up and down and doing manual things. So that's it. But I'm really happy with my decision. And I have so many opportunities in front of me in general, like career wise, that makes a lot of sense. So no, I think the only thing I would have done differently is maybe do a bootcamp in data analysis instead of data science. But at that time, I had no idea. So and the data analysis bootcamps were not really a thing. It was mostly data science. So Yeah.
And do you say that just because of the specifics of the job that you do now, or do you just mean in general that you didn't particularly enjoy the data science, or well, not that you didn't enjoy it, but that you might have preferred a data analysis one?
Yeah, I think what I missed with my academic background, what I missed the most, and what has been the most difficult thing to develop over time is the business side of things. So trying to really um, connect with the business goals, the business strategy. And I think the data science bootcamp is really techy and really into like really technically more challenging into the math, the algorithms, and so on. Whereas the data analysis part was more into trying to connect the two things. Like, okay, we do this because it has this reason, and this is what I have done most of my career after post academia. So I think it would have made more sense for me to focus a bit more on that. Definitely.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think it's, being able to tie what you're doing back to real business value is obviously essential. So yeah, I understand that.
Plus, for a person like that doesn't have like a PhD in math or any kind of like hardcore math background, I think I'm years away from a person like that, or that studied computer science, right? So if you really want to go down the hole of data science from scratch, you need to, dedicate your life to it for a while.
Yeah.
Is-
So can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing in your in your current role? I mean, what are the kind of skills that you need, and what are the kind of projects that you're working on?
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of skills, like my job title is product data analyst. So of course I work very close to product managers, and basically this comes with the fact that we try to understand how users, or in this case, how our researchers interact with us, with Springer Nature, with our websites, with our products, and how can we improve them in a way. So there's I think, a clear skill needed is definitely stakeholder management, and then what we were talking about, the communication and the continuous focusing to the business goals and business strategy. That's key, because in terms of analysis you can do whatever, and you start thinking about ideas or talking about ideas, and you can do it for hours, but really trying to keep the focus into what is important for the product side and for the high upper management strategy, then that's what keeps on going for sure.
Do you think is that something that comes naturally, or is that because you can have the technical skills, and this is something that's pretty common in the industry, isn't it? Where there is that disconnect between the people maybe with that very deep technical knowledge, and then the maybe higher the people with a higher level understanding, sort of like a shallower understanding of that detail, but that they are the ones maybe ultimately making the final decisions. Do you think that ability to communicate between those, to bridge those two worlds, is that something that you feel is something that can be developed over time, or is it something that's more natural in certain people?
Um, a bit of both. It's like Rafael Nadal, or I think of like like important, like or famous players. I think you need to have, or it's better, let's say, if you have kind of a natural talent for it, but at the same time you need to work to develop it, otherwise it will not happen. So naturally you may have a personality fit, or a way of communicating, or some background that may help you to do this, but you definitely need to work. And even if you have it and you start a new role, there's going to be new stakeholders, new strategies. So you always need to kind of develop it, and keep on informing yourself about what are the new things, who you need to talk to, and so on.
Yeah, I agree. And that was a slightly tangential question, but I just find that very interesting. And given the role that you're in, I was very keen to hear your thoughts on that. So yeah, very interesting. I was just going to
I was going to slightly change direction slightly into, as I'm prone to do, the tech side of things. What has been your experience, say, since leaving academia? You obviously worked within data science, which is, like you said, very hands-on, very in the weed, in the code, in the mathematics and the algorithms of it all. When you got into the analysis side of things at the finance company, what was your like tech stack? Were you straight into, for the listeners who don't know, obviously we've worked with Springer Nature quite a lot, and we've recently been working with them on a Dataform project within BigQuery. So I know you know BigQuery from your last couple of years at Springer Nature, but is that what you were using throughout your entire analyst career, or have you used different tools and things?
More or less. So I was familiar with BigQuery before, but when I worked in Project A, I had the luck and the chance to collaborate with many companies that had different tools. So I also got to know other reporting tools, other data warehouses, other transformation tools. So I was very lucky on that end to get to see a bit of everything. But yeah, I think also in terms of like technical skills, like the way I work with BigQuery and in Springer Nature, definitely there are also a lot of talented people. The amount of people of doing analytics is very big. So there are a lot of things set up already, and I've learned a lot over these years for sure. Even though doing SQL is not my preference, it's not the thing that I like to do the most, to be honest.
What is the thing you like to do the most?
Yeah, I would say more talking to product managers. And if, for example, we want to do an experiment, decide if the experiment makes sense, what alternatives we would have, how long would the experiment take to run, what are the conclusions we would take from it. So all of these more strategic decisions, and also to have time to interpret the data and say, okay, because of the data, we should do ABC. Then we can do whatever, but that to have some guidance based on that. So all this data culture part of the role is really interesting for me.
And it links back quite nicely to academia in terms of hypothesizing, experimenting, understanding results, I suppose.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
mean, that must give I was thinking this earlier, that must just give a great grounding. When I asked you, do you regret anything about leaving academia? And you were pretty clear that you don't, but it must be a big advantage taking that background into industry, because I don't want to be too disparaging, but sometimes out in the wilds, things aren't done in such a rigorous way. So having that kind of rigorous scientific background must be, maybe it's a double-edged sword, maybe it's helpful, but then maybe it's
Exactly.
sometimes as well.
I was thinking exactly that word. Like it's that sentence is a double-edged sword, because on the other hand, you really, like, it took me a long time to understand that you need to put into a balance the amount of time you spend doing a task and what you get from it before you actually spend hours into it. In academia, no matter what, you need to go as deep as you can until you get what you need. And it doesn't matter if it takes 1 month, 1 year, right? The importance is to go to the end. And it took me some time to say, okay, this task actually is going to take 3 months, which we don't have. And it also, I may spend my time in something else that is going to bring more value. So all of these, it's a double-edged sword, definitely.
So one of the things we did want to talk to you in a bit of detail about, and Matthew mentioned this briefly earlier, is a recent project that we worked together on. And obviously appreciate we can only go into it to a certain level, but it'd be nice to get a little bit of an understanding, if we can, on the kind of background of that project, and maybe some of even if we focused it on some of your personal outcomes, what did you learn through that work? So maybe, Veronica, you could just start with giving us just a little bit of a background or an overview even of what the project was, this Dataform project that we've worked with you on.
Yeah, so basically we wanted to leverage our data infrastructure tools. I had worked in the past with DBT, which is also great. And I know that having a tool that allows for data transformation with some specific characteristics like DBT or like Dataform does is really a plus. And we wanted to do that in our team and with our data. So yeah, that's why we work with you and to do this at the same time that you have your own task. We are. You need some help. So that's why we also collaborated with you, and makes sense also to do it with people that have done it multiple times for different companies. So to have a clear idea of the setup.
And what went into the so sorry, maybe I'm jumping ahead. But what went into the decision as to whether you went with DBT or with Dataform or with something else entirely?
So I would say internal discussions. And also I remember we had this discussion as well with Matthew and the team, depending on the rest of our setup as well, what makes more sense in terms of cost and in terms of what we had already. So both.
Yeah, I think primarily it came down to the type of data we were working with as well. Like it was all data that was already located in BigQuery and was primarily like Google Analytics type data. So with something like DBT, and I suppose it might just be worth just to take a quick aside here just to explain DBT and Dataform for any listeners that haven't come across it, but they're essentially really pulling apart and modularizing SQL code and creating sort of models and transformations for data that's very repeatable, pulled apart, testable, version controlled, backed up in services like GitLab and GitHub. It just really brings software engineering best practices that have been honed over decades to data engineering, which has been lagging behind a little bit on that front. So that's what those tools are, DBT being the original, and then Dataform came out of a spin-off. Somebody who left Google years ago started Dataform. Google came in, bought the company back off him, merged it into Google, and then eventually BigQuery, and then Dataform is just getting more and more closely melded into BigQuery, as a lot of things are, which has been a theme of the past sort of 3 weeks of this podcast. So it made sense, given the data, given the models that we wanted to be built, and all of the stuff and that we discussed, that Dataform worked because it was free. It's part of the existing services, and we didn't have to host it or do all the other things that we would have to have done with DBT at the time.
Something that I really liked about Dataform from the beginning. I mean, DBT would do the same, but we have now. We had before as well, but now I really like that Dataform provides a clear ERD. So so this is the entity relationship diagram where you can see the relationship in between all your tables and all your queries. And when you have Dataform or DBT, this is much more control. And I feel that the ownership of the queries, the tables is also more clear, and you can reuse, you can define certain things and reuse them. Whereas if you don't have a transformation set up like that, you just need to create queries all the time, or like reuse the query that somebody else wrote and so on, which is not the best.
Yeah, I suppose one way, because one of the nice things you say, like with that graphical interface where you can sort of see what do we call it? Compilation graph, I believe is the term in Dataform, but it's automatically handling the dependencies between each of the nodes of that graph as well. Whereas perhaps with a more traditional way of doing it within a warehouse where you're using stacks of SQL queries and dealing with the dependency between the different SQL queries can become troublesome, and it can be about timing and about this, that, and the other, which can get a bit tricky to handle, especially if it gets very large and you've got lots of different tables and lots of different reporting outputs that you've got to deal with. So it is a really nice way of just viewing things and ensuring that everything is waiting on what it needs to wait on and delivering what it needs to deliver.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the key points, I think, of the success of this project is that we thought from the very beginning together, how do we want to structure it? Because at the beginning, it's a blank canvas and you can do everything. But having an idea of what type of, let's say, levels or different tables you want to have and why they are like this. I think that makes a lot of sense. And it helps. The difficulty of all of this is making it scalable. Because, of course, you can have a picture of the tables you want today, but you need to think of how your setup is going to look like tomorrow. So you can scale it. And that's, I think, the difficult and the key part of this.
And on that note, what does maintain? Because treat me and maybe some of our listeners like they know absolutely nothing or virtually nothing about this. But what would be the what's involved in kind of maintaining and scaling it? Like you said, so let's say the needs, the number of tables grows or the size of the data, whatever, and you need to scale this, you need to change it. Is it quite an involved process maintaining this once it's all set up, or is that just in the hands of a small number of people who can make a small number of changes to make sure it's, what kind of like what's involved in that ongoing maintenance and scaling of the solution?
I would say depending on how you set it up, that's why this is an important decision from the beginning. But ideally, it would rely on small number of people or the people that work with it ideally, but it really all depends on how you set it up. And one of the key aspects here, which I think it really relates well to the beginning of our conversation, is the knowledge of the product. In this case, because we are talking about the product side, right? If we would be talking about the marketing side, then the marketing knowledge, right? But that you have a clear understanding of the product and some ideas of how it may evolve. And this requires conversations with the product managers, with the strategy to see, okay, this is how we may grow in this direction or in this other direction. So hence our data will probably look like this. And then it makes sense to have this structure. You may be wrong, but it makes sense to have it like this.
And I think, and tell me if you agree with this, Veronica, but there's almost a bit of a paradox in terms of the complexity of things, because when you first come across something like Dataform or DBT, especially as an established analyst, it's very foreign and it's a new way of working, pulling apart SQL queries into these modular forms and having repeatable pieces of it tucked away over here to be used in multiple places. It's a bit odd at first. It's a bit disorientating. And it can feel like the simpler of the two routes is to go down the scheduled query path because it's familiar and you know how to do it and you can just write it all in one thing. So it feels less complex, but I think in reality, it's actually more complicated to have stacks of scheduled queries because, for one, most of that knowledge is locked inside the individual's head who wrote that scheduled query, and it's very difficult to sort of explain that to somebody else. And for two, like you can have all of this documentation and unit testing and assertions being sort of automatic testing that occurs, and version controls and all of these different layers and the modularized nature of it that I think makes it easier to maintain. Even if when you first get into it as an analyst, you might think this feels a bit more complicated than I'm used to. I don't know if that reflects your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as everything that is new takes time. It takes time, and thanks to you actually, and everything that, because we did as well a quite extensive handover process and educational process, and this is also important to say we did this, and it makes a lot of sense. It's not that we collaborated and then we were alone with the tables or with the infrastructure. No, it's a process of while it's being set up, understanding why things are being done, and then hand over. So this makes sense. And of course, as everything new, as I was saying, when everything new comes in, it takes time, but it makes a lot of sense already from the perspective, and maybe for the people that didn't use it, with Dataform, you can see the query that is populating the table, but you can also see like a line which goes back to the previous table that is connected to it, and you can also see the query of that. So you have a real clear visibility of how things are put together. Whereas if you have a scheduled queries, first you need to have permission to see these scheduled queries. You need to know who set them up. You need to understand how the tables are connected. So yeah, it's also creates or removes the dependency on other people to keep on working.
So once you get your head around initially just the fact that it's something new, it sounds like from what you're saying that actually you end up in a place where it's a lot clearer. You can see what's connected to what. You can, as opposed to maybe the old way of, maybe I shouldn't say the old way, because maybe this is still a suitable way for certain people depending on their needs. But the way you were doing
it depends on the complexity.
Yes, depends on the complexity.
If you're not going to create a Dataform repo to potentially make a reporting table. That is probably overkill. But when you've got a more complicated sort of estate of raw data and a lot of different reporting tables and potentially a lot of different stakeholders, then it definitely makes sense, I think.
I was going to ask you both that, actually. I mean, you've kind of answered it there, but I guess with a lot of technology or a lot of solutions, whatever, there's a tipping point, and it's maybe sometimes not that clear where that is. I'm trying to get my own head around at what point somebody would need to use something like Dataform or DBT, because there'll be a point where it's too small or too simple, and there's a point then where it's definitely big enough and complicated enough. But do either of you have any guidance for maybe anyone out there who's listening thinking, "Oh, I'm not sure, I'm somewhere in the middle. Do I need this? Do I not need this?" Tough question.
Massive spread. I can say what I think. But you are
looking at each other.
I can say something, but then you are the expert for sure. I think that apart from the complexity, it's about as well the amount of data transformations you want to make. Because if you just want your data to do small calculations and to do small transformations, then you probably don't need the data form. So at the core of it is used to transform data, right? And to create new tables and so on. So that also makes sense, and depends as well on how many data sets you're working with together at the same time.
I think that's an important. I think that if you're trying to join multiple data sets together, say if we switch to a marketing analytics mindset for a moment, you've got Google ads coming in, Facebook ads, GA4, a couple of other different sources. You want to pull that data together and try and sort of join it and model it. Just do Dataform. Start there. Start thinking there, because it's just going to make your life a lot easier in the long run. Even if in the short term, it's going to be a bit more complex to get your head around. Because again, this is part and parcel of BigQuery. It's not going to cost you any more money. It's just going to give you a more robust foundation to sort of build on top of. And I think a little bit of what you said earlier, Veronica, where you're saying, plan out what you're wanting to do and how this is going to look for scaling down the line. It could be that you've got a real concrete plan and know what you're going to do. Like, right, we're going to get this data in, then we're going to get this data source in and this data source in. If you know and have a good plan in mind, then why not begin to do it with Dataform? Because you can scale it and pull in different resources and build on top of the modeling you're building, rather than going off for 6 months, building a lot of scheduled queries and then going, right, okay, we need to tear all that down now and build out this because we've got this data source in. So I think, simple stuff where you're just sort of accessing raw or near raw data, you're probably fine to use just BigQuery, and they've now added in repositories in BigQuery, so you can even back up your little standalone SQL queries. But when you start to join a couple of data sets together or start to have a bit of a longer term plan, build the foundations with something like Dataform or DBT, and your tomorrow self will probably thank you for doing so.
Yeah. And of course, it's also connected to GitHub, or you can connect it to GitHub, which is great because you can have version control. You can have others reviewing your code, and all of this always, makes it much better.
I was just going to say, how have you found so say your day to day, and I know you've used this before and things like that, but let's not say since the project we worked together, but comparing a day to day of say troubleshooting or creating a new request or dealing with a new request in an existing world where it's just schedule queries and sort of stacked queries in that way versus doing that with something like Dataform or DBT, can you feel and see a difference there of like it's simpler because it's of the way it's structured and things, or?
Yeah, I think it's also a lot more transparent. Like, let's say, my colleague is off today or is sick, then I can really see the stuff, or I can review the query. I can see what has changed, how was before. Whereas if you have just scheduled queries, either you have a very good documentation in place with everything, or you need to continue. You depend on others. You depend on the person that did it. And I think here, like with DBT or with Dataform, that dependency is smaller. It's still there, but much smaller, definitely.
Yeah. And I suppose as well, I mean, hopefully good colleagues don't leave, but they do, and people move on and go to different businesses, and the dependency you have on an individual as they leave the company when they've got this complex data infrastructure they've constructed, and a lot of it exists inside their head. And with the best will in the world, manual documentation is prone to gaps and dying on the vine a little bit. The automated nature of some of this stuff just makes it a no-brainer and easier to onboard new people. You have to.
Yeah, maybe something as well that we should say is that, or that I think it's a real advantage of these tools, is that you can connect it to GitHub, is that you can have different environments. So you can test things without necessarily making changes in the live version. So this is super helpful because you have an idea or you want to test different ways of putting something together, and you don't necessarily need to tell all your colleagues, okay, I'm going to change this. You can do it just yourself on your local machine and then see how it looks like. So that's also great.
Yeah, that's like one of the biggest things that I think comes from that software engineering best practice rule book. Of you can almost think of, say, all the dashboards you're building for product owners as production data products, and you can be experimenting and building and doing what you want with the underlying SQL in your branch, in your Dataform repo, without ever worrying that you're going to accidentally break something that they are reliant on us from a business perspective. That like you can just tinker to your heart's content until you're happy, and then push that up to the production environment, which again is something that's not really been a mainstay of data engineering and analysis for a very long time.
So, Veronica, you mentioned, I think I'm right in saying you mentioned as part of your intro that you had worked with DBT before. Am I right about that?
Yes, but not as much as with Dataform.
Okay, I was just going to ask you. I mean, you can probably still answer this, but what's your kind of view on like what if you were to compare them, or even like what are some of the differences? I guess they do similar things, but are there any kind of notable differences that you've identified having worked with both of them?
I think they are structured in a slightly different way, and the methodology of how you set up like definitions and constants and so on is a bit different, but they are very similar. Like I think it's more a preference than I don't know, Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong, but for what I have seen, it's more a matter of preference than really advantages of one versus the other. But I've not used DBT to understand that I have used Dataform, so I'm also not objective in my comparison. I think that it's also visually is different, so it's just a bit mainly on how you like it. I like DBT a lot, but yeah, like visually it's more like they did a great job.
Yeah, I think as well. So the sort of headline differences are DBT uses Python for its sort of repeatable code pieces and sort of, so for within Dataform and DBT, you can write actual code functions to sort of loop through things and create little distinct functions of transformations and stuff in, say, JavaScript and Python rather than SQL. And DBT uses Python, Dataform uses JavaScript. As Dataform's got absorbed by Google, they no longer offer like a cloud version that you can deploy anywhere, I don't believe. So DBT obviously used to be a standalone thing that you could host. Dataform used to be a standalone thing you could host wherever you wanted, but now it's very much integrated into BigQuery, where DBT, you can still host a version of it wherever you want on your own servers. You could host a version of DBT in Google Cloud if you so wished, but obviously there's associated costs with that hosting and things. I think DBT is also it is a more mature product because it's been around for a lot longer, but I think Google has done a very good job of really integrating Dataform into BigQuery. So if most of your data is sitting inside of BigQuery and that's going to be your warehouse, it does feel a little bit like a no-brainer to me, but I'm sure that people will tell me otherwise. But
Yeah, exactly. I think it really depends also where your data is stored and located. That's definitely like a key point for deciding in between one and the other.
We've gotten this far and nobody's mentioned AI, so I'm gonna be the one to throw it out there. But like specifically initially, at least to do with Dataform, this again could be to either of you. Everything in BigQuery now, everything in Google Cloud has got AI assistance. Does Dataform, is the need? I'm going to try not to ask too rambly a question, but is the need to use something like Dataform, is that inevitably going to disappear? Will you just have something, a conversational interface where you'll say what you want to do with your data, and it'll go away and it'll do the Dataform bit for you, and you won't even need to have the skills to do that? Is that the way it's going to go, do you think?
I think I think this is a good example of what Dataform is and why it's different to other things on, say, BigQuery and the AI stuff they're putting out there, because a lot of the AI features they're adding in seem very standalone. So like a data preparation where you get a data set and you go through a set of transformations and output a table, or like the Canvas assistant where you're exploring a piece of data and trying to get to a conclusion, or the data engineering assistant that will take you through trying to get a pipeline of data out and it transformed in some way. Dataform to me is it's a much larger picture. You're taking a large number of different data sets and combining and modeling and putting them all together in a very repeatable fashion to service service activations in whatever form they take, be it dashboard, be it ML, be it whatever. And so far, there's not been any rumblings yet of Google having an assistant sitting inside of Dataform or anything like that, perhaps because of that, because you need to have that larger picture view, like Veronica talked about a little bit earlier, where you really need to think about a really wide estate and how you're going to transform and build and scale that. I'm sure there will be assistants start to appear in there. I have no doubt about it, but currently there isn't anything there.
Even if it's useless, they'll just put it in there anyway.
Yeah, but it's as I said, they sellotape Gemini onto anything at the moment.
But maybe sorry, Veronica, just before you give your take on that, I just gonna, because to me, to my uninformed brain, everything you just said there, Matthew, sounded like it actually made it a prime candidate for AI-ifying. It's like it's repeatable stuff. It's pulling in, across multiple systems or data sources. So isn't that exactly the kind of thing that AI can help with? What am I misunderstanding? Maybe everything.
I think it can. Yeah, I think it can and could. I suppose that what it lacks currently is that big picture view of things, and the stuff that Google gestured towards, shall we say, next, that it's going to start to have a larger picture of your entire warehouse, and it's going to have access to this data over there and this data over there, and it's going to be able to sort of understand your specific enterprise world a little bit better. At that point, it can maybe start to help you model wider data sets and create transformations. But I think the problem at the minute is any of those transformations it does will be very much in a use case by use case basis, rather than linking all of those use cases together into a larger model. If any of that makes sense, that might have just been a rambly bit of nonsense, but
Yeah, and I have no doubts that it will happen and it will be there. But you just said something that for me is key in this, which is about giving access to the data sets and giving access to your stuff. So I think that, of course, everything that about AI is really hot right now, and everyone who wants to do it and develop tools that are AI based. But the situation is Jumanji at the moment, meaning that I think there will be a point where the privacy aspect of it is gonna come into or it already is, but I think it's gonna come into the picture more and more. And I'm not sure how many companies would be willing to give AI, Google, or whatever enterprise access to everything in order to do the job. Yeah.
dimension. I mean, that's one of the things that came up in Next, where they've got this. Can we get the term right this time, Dara? Because we buggered up the term last time. But the idea of sort of taking Google Cloud off the cloud and having your own localized version of it for really large enterprises that are very sensitive to regulation or to whatever, so say like the banking sector or whatever it may be, and it being, we said airlocked last time, which definitely wasn't right.
Yeah, I'm trying to Google it. I know what you mean. That's all I can think of is the wrong way to say
Air
it.
gap.
Air gap. That's the one. We're
Yeah,
smart,
to have an
we're
air
smart
gap,
people.
to give the company the feeling and trust that they own the data and that it's still with them and they're just utilizing tools developed by Google rather than it going off and living in Google's ecosystem and on Google's cloud. I think people are still going to be sensitive to that. So that's definitely a problem Google has to figure out how to solve, or to at least convince people they've solved it.
So what about in your, so you're right in saying, you said a few minutes ago, Veronica, that you said, like AI is obviously the hot topic at the moment. What in your kind of, in your current role, are you feeling the pressure to do more with AI, or are you finding, and I guess a little background to my question is, when from our side of the fence as a consultancy, we're obviously having to keep up with all of this stuff. And what we sometimes forget or don't appreciate is, on the other side of the fence, in-house, it might be very different. And in some cases, businesses might just be like, look, we've got priorities, and at the moment, this just isn't one of them. We'll get to it. So how are you finding it from, an in-house role? How are you finding all the buzz around AI? Are you feeling that's filtering down to pressure on you, or is it actually just noise that you can just filter out?
I think that AI internally, or from my point of view, it's a topic, and it would everybody's looking at it, and every company looks at it. So it's definitely a hot topic, and it's something that everybody that I mean, like with everything that is new, you have two options: either you close your eyes or you accept the situation. So now, I mean, we need to accept this is what it is, and I think everybody is into this phase and see what can we do with it. But from my point of view, at least, I think the smart thing to do, or something like, technically AI will do everything. I have no intention of being a pro in any language, programming language, or doing anything, because AI can already do it for me and will do it for me. What I think it will still take time is having this thorough understanding of the business and deep understanding of the product, or so on. So, for example, in my case, because I did as well the PhD and I worked in academia, I know how research publishing works, and how everything is set up from the beginning to the end, and what I have in mind, what our users are like, because I have been one of these users. And this AI will never be able to give it to me. Yeah, can give me a summary or can give me some ideas, but this is the advantage, I would say, or like this should be the focus. Let AI do what AI can do, which is a lot of things. But yeah, But yeah, definitely companies are all into that.
So it sounds like you're not worried about it, because I know some people are thinking, "Oh, it's going to come along and take my job." It sounds like you're in the other camp of people thinking, "No, let it do the repetitive work. Let it take that off my hands and let me use the stuff that only I can do."
Yeah, exactly. And also, I mean, and there's no way we can, even if you don't like AI, it's here already, right? It's like with everything in life, you need to accept that the reality it is what it is. So once you they spend less time about co- complaining or like trying not to accept something that is already happening, then use the time for something else. And of course, it's gonna replace probably some jobs, but more than replace, I think it will replace certain tasks and certain skills, and the jobs will evolve. Definitely. Like, I mean, if you compare now what our parents did or like to jobs now and in the 60s or the 50s, of course they are different, even if they have the same name. So I think it will just evolve.
I can even go narrower than that. If I think about what we did at Measurelab at the start versus what we're doing now, it's very different, and that's only 12, 13 years. So you're right. These things keep changing, and you can't ignore them. AI is here. The technology is changing. We just have to adapt to it, don't we? And I think what you were saying about it not replacing jobs is something Matthew says a lot around it, augmenting. It'll augment you, and you can use it as an aid to make your job easier, make you more efficient.
Exactly. Like we have Google Maps that at the time we didn't have, or I don't know if like I was recently planning a trip and I asked ChatGPT, why not? I mean, either me spending time there and then it gives me some answers and it may help. So I just think that closing the eyes is not a good strategy because it's already here. And we are still here working, right? We are not anywhere else.
Exactly. I just had one more question for you. I don't know. Then obviously, maybe Matthew's got more, or maybe there's other stuff you wanted to bring up yourself. But just one other question I wanted to ask you. So you mentioned, and I agree with you, that you don't really need to go and be an expert in any particular coding language now. So what are you spending that extra time on? Are you learning anything else now instead of, and I don't just necessarily mean with your, like, specifically to your role now, but what are you spending learning time on now that you might have previously spent on something like coding languages that you can now use AI to help you with?
Yeah, I personally like a lot storytelling. So I try to get informed or like get educated about that because at the end of the day, a lot of things are how you tell them, or it's about how you tell them and not exactly what you're saying. So I like to get educated into that. Also, I like the part or the fact of um, making decisions more data driven. This is like also like a super word now. This data driven everywhere. Okay, so apart from the super word or that is like AI that is hot, I think it makes sense to understand what does it really mean to be data driven and what are the limitations and the possibilities of it within a specific context. So I like those topics, to be honest. But yeah, I also spend time coding. But yeah.
Okay, I think that draws us to quite a natural conclusion. I've really enjoyed this chat, so thank you again for agreeing to come on and talk to us. And really great to hear that you're a fan of the show as well. It's nice to have somebody who has listened to episodes then come on and actually see what it's like sitting in the hot seat and be a guest. So it's been a really, really interesting conversation for me. I've really enjoyed having you on the podcast and talking to you about your role and your interests and obviously your views on AI as well.
Thank you so much. And also Matthew and the team for working with us. It has been a great experience. And yeah, also to chat to you today. And for anybody out there that wants to do the transition or any transition, don't be scared. If I can do it, everybody can do it. And definitely, yes. And it's fun. So yeah, I'm always happy to chat.
That's it for this week's episode of the Measure Pod. We hope you enjoyed it and picked up something useful along the way. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on so you don't miss future episodes.
And if you're enjoying the show, we'd really appreciate it if you left us a quick review. It really helps more people discover the pod and keeps us motivated to bring back more. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.